my hypothesis is that in 2008, this is not a hypothesis, it's a fact, especially in this city, you know really deep into your bones how the City of London collapsed. Every single bank went bankrupt, every single one, including Barclays, who claimed they weren't, but they were. And then you had states like the United States of America, like the United Kingdom, like the European Union, essentially refloating finance, essentially using both taxes to a very small extent, but primarily the printing presses of the central banks like the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Fed, and so on, to produce huge quantities of money, proving that the money tree is alive and kicking, in order to refloat the financiers. Now, at the very same time, you remember that our great and good rulers, in their infinite wisdom, decided at the same time that they started printing masses of quantities of pounds and yen and euros and dollars on behalf of the financiers, socialism for the bankers, I call it for short. They practiced austerity for the masses in the United Kingdom, in the European Union. We Greeks were the champions of austerity, but also in the United States and elsewhere. So what happens if you have austerity for the many and socialism for the bankers? Well, what does quantitative easing mean? First, they reduced interest rates to zero because, of course, capitalism was dying, so they needed to give it a little bit of a boost to make money dirt cheap or free. That's what zero interest rate means. You can borrow at no cost. That wasn't enough. So then they started printing money, and by the charter of the Bank of England or the Federal Reserve of the United States, they just can't produce money and throw it around the place using helicopters. I wish that would have been far better, Everybody getting a piece of the pie of the produce, the fruit from the money tree. But they can't. What they can do is they can essentially increase the reserves of the private bankers. All private banks have a bank account with the Bank of England in this country. So, you wake up one morning, you are Lloyds, and the Bank of England has credited your account with $1 billion, or 10, or 100, right? The idea being that then, as a banker, you have an incentive to lend it on to business, and the business will use it in order to employ people, and the economy gets restarted. But it's not how it pans out, because even if Lloyds picks up the phone and calls British Aerospace, or a car industry, or any large producer, and says, I've got £100 million for you, free. Why would the bank give it for free? Because it has gotten it at minus prices. Effectively, the Bank of England has paid Lloyds and Barclays to take the money. So they can give it away at zero interest rate to Rolls-Royce and still make money, right? But then the large corporations that get this free money look outside the window, and what they see is impecunious masses. People who can afford high value-added products because of austerity. But they have all this money that has been given to them for free. Now, if they thought that by building a European or a British Tesla or a high value-added good, they would be able to make money out of it, they would have done it. But there's no conspiracy here. It's just that they look at all of you folks and they say, well, these people don't have any money. So as if we're going to manufacture, a kind of Tesla for the masses. The masses won't be able to afford it. And there's something much easier they can do to make money. So if you are the CEO of a large corporation and you've been given £100 million for free, what should you do? You go to the London Stock Exchange, or better, the New York Stock Exchange, or even the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, and you buy back your own shares. Because that sends their price through the roof, and your bonus as a CEO is linked to the price of your share. And then you get zillions in your bank account, your personal bank account, and then you go and buy real estate. That pushes the value of real estate up. You buy other shares. You buy Bitcoin, you buy art, you buy all sorts of rubbish, whose value goes up. And there is a rally of everything, an everything rally, except that the masses have nothing, and the few have everything, so inequality burgeons. Now, how does this link to that? So far, not at all. So there's no, I'm not saying that the central banks printed money in order to help the cloudalists, the techno-feudal lords. No, they had no idea that they would be helping the bases. They were simply acting in panic to refloat finance. But it was an unintended consequence that the only capitalists who took the money from the banks and actually invested it in capital were these people. So whereas Volkswagen in Germany invested nothing, Siemens in Germany invested zero. That's why now the business model of Germany is kaput, it's finished, because they invested nothing all those years. It was the big tech folks who took the money, and I have it on good authority from somebody really very high up in Facebook, that 9 out of $10 that Facebook invested in all the cloud capital that now makes Meta, 9 out of $10 came from the free money minted by the Federal Reserve, by the Central Bank of the United States. So essentially, society has funded the creation of cloud capital, which we keep replenishing through the use of our apps. That's the long and the short of your
So just on this
question.
point, because this relates to the technology element of it, Sohrab Ahmari, who I disagree with on a great many things, but he put something quite pithily, and I think there's something in it. In previous eras, technological innovation transformed our physical reality. So trains and planes made the world smaller, skyscrapers put people in the sky. This is technology which is changing the physical world around us, because basically it changes how we interact with the physical world. But now you look at technological innovation, it's simulations of reality. So virtual reality, or AI, the simulation of a human intelligence. Cryptocurrencies, the sort of simulation of money. There's a sort of lack of tangibility, but not just in a physical sense. It's an escape from the physical world around us. That's what it's offering. Are you saying that that's a direct result of the government's quantitative easing program, printing money, techno-capitalists making use of it, or is there something else going on there?
Techno-feudalism, you mean? You said techno-capitalism, you insist.
You know what? Because I just don't buy that it's a distinct phase from capitalism. You haven't sold me on it yet.
Okay, fine. But I'm not going to talk about techno-capitalism because I don't believe that this is techno-capitalism. I think this is techno-feudalism, because rent is driving the system, Ash. This is the point. And when you have rent driving the system is really profoundly different from a system that is driven by profits. And before I answer your question, let me try to convince you once more, which I probably won't, which is fine. Compare the monopoly capitalists that created the transformation of the physical world that you refer to. People like Thomas Edison or Henry Ford, that ushered in mass manufacturing, the transformation of our cities, the end of the tramways and the replacement with buses and cars and motorways and highways and byways and all that. Think of Thomas Edison, who produced everything from the power station producing electricity all the way to the light bulb, right? Now one may say that what's the difference between these people and Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Zuckerberg or the Google empire? Is it that this empire is immaterial, as you put it, at the level of our imagination, at the level of our senses, and not material? No, I don't think that is the great difference. I think the great difference is that Henry Ford or Thomas Edison, who I mentioned before, were monopolizing markets. They were manufacturing things that they wanted to sell to you. They used the enormous power that economies of scale gave them, that networked companies gave them, the network of electricity from the power station to the light bulb, which is a natural monopoly. Once you create it, it's a natural monopoly. You really can't set up another grid in parallel to that. You can't have 10 different cables coming out of your wall to provide you electricity. So they created monopoly, they monopolized markets to sell the products, the commodities, the material and immaterial. Is electricity material or immaterial? That's a philosophical question, right?
I dropped sciences after GCSE, so
yeah,
I don't know.
But you know what I mean, right? So they monopolized markets to sell you their stuff. And they were very keen to say, you know, Henry Ford got a lot of personal satisfaction by seeing you drive around in a Model T. It was a vindication of his power to put you in a Model T and watch you drive around and not take the tramway, right? Jeff Bezos is not producing anything. He doesn't want to sell you anything in particular. He doesn't give a damn what you buy. Or Uber doesn't own cars, has no interest in whether you are being driven around in a Volkswagen or a Tesla or a Toyota. Doesn't give a damn. So in that sense, they don't care about the material, but they care about their power to extract rents from you. So Ford is using machinery, capital, analog capital, not cloud capital, in order to use its economies of scale to create the power to capture you and to sell you the stuff that comes out of his machinery, the produced means of production. Whereas these guys, and they're guys, right? What they do is they create an imagined space out of material cloud capital, server farms and all that, and cell towers, in which they enclose us to extract rents from everybody, producing anything, from the producers of binoculars, of exercise bicycles, of books. They cream off the surplus value from there, and they make you, for the first time in history, produce capital with unwaged labor. Now, for me, if you call this techno-capitalism, you effectively lose the magnitude of the phenomenon and the way it works and the dynamics. Now, one last thing, addressing your question directly about materiality and immateriality. It has changed the material world, especially if you go to a place like San Francisco or Shanghai, for that matter. You know, the digitization of everything has totally transformed the feel of a place. The fact that remember the movie Her? Was predicting the way that everybody talks to their phone. Now that changes the world we live in. The way that these days, you go into a shop and you have to play around with it. You don't say hello to anyone. You just go and you struggle against the machine, trying to pay. Use an app. The way in which the workplace is being transformed, especially after the pandemic, with Zoom and working from home. That is changing the texture, not just of our imagined life, but also of our physical space. The fact that you have transformation of ugly office buildings into horrible apartment buildings because people are working from home. This is material. It's a material process.
You know what? I might be getting a little bit sold, a tiny bit sold. You mentioned Shanghai, and we have to talk about China. You discussed techno-feudalism with Chinese characteristics in the book. It's notable that you said, look, after 2008, there would have been no money in producing, high value-added goods like Teslas for the people because no one's got any money, right? Mm-hmm. These are people who are struggling because of austerity. But China is producing electric vehicles at a far lower cost than America and Europe is able to. So what is techno-feudalism with Chinese characteristics? How is it different?
It's very similar. It's very similar, but there are some telling and crucial differences. One is that we are talking about a state capitalist system which plans, unlike what's happening in Europe, and to a very large extent what's happening in the United States. So compare and contrast two gentlemen, Jeff Bezos and Jack Ma. Ma is M-A. Have you heard of Jack Ma? He's the Jeff Bezos of China, or was. He created Alibaba. Alibaba is the Chinese Amazon. It is just as technologically advanced as Amazon, just as effective, just as productive. What is the difference? The difference is that at some point, when his wealth exceeded a certain threshold, and his power exceeded a certain threshold, the Chinese Communist Party came down upon him like a ton of bricks. And they didn't send him to the gulag, but they effectively gave him a year off his business. And they said, well, up to here, you don't make any more money. And curtailed the power of Alibaba. And regulated the extent to which Alibaba could control the payment system. Whereas in the United States, there is no such. You know, Lisa Khan, who is the very valiant, very, very nice woman that Joe Biden appointed to essentially try to break up or shrink the exorbitant power of the tech lords. She's doing the best she can with the instrument that she has been given. But it's nothing compared to what the Chinese Communist Party can do with the cloudalists in China. The cloudalists in China have a certain degree of freedom, and then beyond that, the Chinese Communist Party comes and says, no more. You're not going to be able to extract more rents from the public. Now, that is a double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, it is good to have checks and balances for exorbitant power, but then of course, the Chinese Communist Party is not exactly a democratic institution, and there are no checks and balances in the exorbitant power of President Xi. But at least you see the difference with the West. The second difference, and I think this is a crucial one, and it may hold the key to understanding why we may be facing a thermonuclear war. Difference between Chinese cloud capital and American cloud capital. And it is this. There is an application, an app in China called WeChat. WeChat. It belongs to another conglomerate, Tencent. WeChat is worthwhile taking a look at it because it is quite phenomenal. It does everything that Netflix, Spotify, Google, Amazon, all the apps that we know and love in the West, you know, WeChat does everything. You can watch movies, listen to music, send messages, Twitter, the whole thing, right? And it does something that no UK, EU, or essentially Silicon Valley app can do. It gives you the capacity to make payments to anyone using the Chinese currency, the yuan, for free. No fees, no delay, nothing. You know, you have a WeChat app, you can pay anyone around the world in yuan at zero cost. That application does not exist in the Western world, in the West, because Wall Street will not allow it. Wall Street will never allow Apple or Google or any of the big tech companies or Amazon to rein in Wall Street's capacity to extract financial rents from you every time you make a payment. So Visa, MasterCard, Bank of America, Lloyds Bank, and so on will always ensure that there is no WeChat in the West. And now, why is this significant? I was talking while I was writing this book. I was years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, even before I started writing this book. I was talking to a German industrialist. He had a mid-sized German company, which meant 3,000 workers, but that's mid-sized in Germany back then, making propellers for Chinese shipyards in Shanghai, outside Shanghai. Those huge propellers were made using copper and aluminum produced in Shenzhen, in China. So the metal, aluminum, copper went from China to Germany, turned into a propeller, and then going back to China to be installed in these massive container ships and so on, right? Now, the normal payment process was, every time he wanted to buy the metal from China, he would have to tell his bank, Deutsche Bank, in Hamburg, wherever it was, to send the money to the Bundesbank. The Bundesbank is the equivalent of the Bank of England, the central bank of Germany. Then the money was going next door, again in Frankfurt, from the Central Bank of Germany to the European Central Bank. Then it would go through Washington through the Fed system, because every payment you make internationally has to be approved by the Americans. You have no capacity as Britons to make payments internationally that is not approved of by the United States of America. Know that. This is not something that is widely advertised. And from there, it would go to the Chinese central bank, and from the Chinese central bank would go to the private bank of the aluminum or copper producer in Shenzhen. That was every time the money changed hands, a little bit, a small rent was charged by intermediaries, right? And it takes 2 or 3 days for this payment to be completed, even as we speak, right? And then when the propeller would be sold, then the money would have to follow this tortuous path in the opposite direction back to the German propeller producer, okay? And at some point he told me about WeChat. That's how I found out about WeChat. He said, but now I use WeChat. Because all I have to do is press a button. And the money goes from my bank account, which I have with a Chinese bank, press a button and goes to my supplier, and then from my customer it comes back to me. And it's all, of course, in one.